Okay, we're live. Hi,
Hello.
everyone. Hi. Hi, everyone. This is Radley Griffin with Griffin Concierge Medical, and I'm here with Mihaela Telecan, who is our colleague, our low-carb expert, and we wanted to connect today on Facebook Live to talk about ourselves and how we got into the low-carb world and how we think we're making a difference in our loved ones, our patients' lives. So nice to have you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you today and share all the good news about a different way of eating and living to acquire health.
Excellent. So, well, let's find out a little bit about you. How did you get started in this low carbohydrate lifestyle world, counseling, educating? What led you here?
Well, the story is really long. I was interested in healing my body, basically constipation. That was the main issue I dealt with since my 20s.
Yeah.
That brought me into becoming vegan, raw vegan, and vegetarian for about 10 years. And that turned out it was quite detrimental to my overall health, from gut health to blood sugar management. So I'm jumping now. I'm pregnant, and despite the fact that I never had weight issues, and even during pregnancy, I just gained weight by the book. When I did the screening test for diabetes, I didn't pass.
Ah.
So that was like a big surprise for me. But now when I look back, I understand being raw, vegan, and vegetarian for 10 years, I overate fruits. And starches, of course, because you have to eat something if you eliminate animal foods. And definitely that put a toll on my pancreas. So after I gave birth to my son, then I started looking both into healing the gut because I had leaky gut and dysbiosis. So I looked at elimination diets, and I came across the GAPS nutritional protocol. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, but it's on the spectrum of low carbohydrate diets. Basically eliminates complex carbs that are difficult to break down if the gut is not healthy, and then it's based on whole foods and brings in healing foods like the meat and bone extract and animal fats and fermented foods. And then from there, in my attempts to also manage blood sugar and just, I guess intuitively, I went more and more low carb, and for few years into it, I felt like, wow, I'm healed. And eventually I had incredible physical performance, from healing to doing long distance bike rides in a fasting state. So it just kind of went into organically. I combined fasting, intermittent fasting, with the low carb whole foods. I healed my body. I have energy. And then, of course, in parallel with this, I was studying the science behind it. Right. And I started to use it with my coaching clients. And, of course, the results are just fantastic. So I feel like I'm blessed to be coming across this therapeutic approach to address metabolic disorders and overall chronic diseases.
Right. Excellent.
So that's kind of my story.
Great, and for those that don't know me, I'm a family physician. My training in undergraduate was actually in nutrition, and I didn't really get into having a nutrition degree in doctors were often not the most well versed on all things nutrition, and I was no different. And really, the change for me was when you have to exercise more than you take in, or burn more calories than you take in. It was the old calories in, calories out philosophy. And what was so frustrating in my early stages of practice, because you're one-on-one with your patients and you really you really want to see results. And so I wasn't getting any results with my patients. I wasn't seeing their blood sugar improve. The weight wasn't coming off. And that was just really frustrating. And it was actually a patient of mine who asked me to take a look at a few books because she had lost tremendous amount of weight following, at first, when this sort of low carb sort of made its way into my world, I read the book Wheat Belly, and wheat was the root of all evil, you know. And that morphed into others. And then finally, I say this book changed my practice, and my way of practicing is Gary Taub's Why We Get Fat. And that was just, I read that, and I couldn't, I needed more information. And then we actually started patients on Dr. Westman's diet at Duke University, and we call it the Duke diet, the no sugar, no starch diet. And I was just seeing the results really immediately. Weight was coming off, diabetes was being reversed, and it was really invigorating to see patients do so well. Medications were eliminated, and it's really, this has taken a life of its own over the past, about 5 or 6 years now. And then even more recently, I think the reason I'm even more into this now is personally, I didn't always practice what I preached, and being in my 40s, you feel your age a little bit more than being in your 30s. So I also started the past year and a half really focusing on patients for the first time. How are you explaining this to your patients as far as why this works?
Can you please repeat the question, because for a few seconds I lost you again. For some reason, I don't know, something is wrong in the connection.
Okay, I'll repeat. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today was why this works, the science behind it. Why is this way of eating so helpful for our patients? And I often say, now this diet only works for 100% of people who try it, and I feel so strongly about that. Anyone with any metabolic issues, I feel low carb, high fat is their answer for reversal of those issues. But maybe let's share a little bit about how you explain the process to your clients and patients.
I would love to. In fact, this morning, I'm writing a book about this whole issue. So this morning I was thinking it can be brought down to two simple, I don't know if they're that simple, but anyway, it's about keeping your health at the cellular and intracellular level. Cellular, I'm talking about the enterocyte, because that's where we begin to absorb nutrients. So if the gut is healthy, given that we eat the foods that support healing, we are going to absorb the nutrients, and then from there, we want to have the intracellular health, and that's the mitochondria, which is responsible for generating energy for the body from the foods we eat. Now, where food fits into this picture is the macronutrients we get from food. We have carbohydrates, protein, and fats, and their interaction with the hormones that regulate metabolism. And the key player here is insulin. So I would say everything is centered about this hormone, insulin, and then if we look at food that elicits or induces an insulin response is the macronutrient carbohydrate. Protein, a little bit, has about half of that effect. And fat are virtually neutral metabolically speaking. So what we see in people with obesity or overweight, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, dyslipidemia, I mean, dysregulation in fats that we measure in the blood with elevated LDL, low HDL, high triglycerides, PCOS, which is commonly seen in women. All of these have at their common cause, insulin.
Right.
So it makes sense, instead of looking at, for instance, diabetic, managing your blood sugar, let's make sure You eat whatever you eat, but we give you drugs and insulin that will allow us to measure a normal blood sugar in your levels of glucose in your blood. So I feel like that's not enough. It's good, yeah, because elevated blood sugars, they have their negative impact on overall health. So we know about the uncontrolled diabetes and its side effects, right? But we have to go one step deeper, whereas what do we do to keep insulin at normal levels? Because of course, insulin, it's not like you don't want to have insulin. You want to have insulin at normal levels.
Right.
So the best way we can achieve that is by dialing down the amount and types of carbohydrates we consume that trigger an insulin response. I call this insulinogenic carbohydrates, and or restrict from eating altogether. Most people are not excited about not eating altogether, although that can come very organically and naturally once you lower the carbs. Right. But the first approach is about bringing down these carbs and bringing up the good fat. So it's important now to say what are the carbs that are to be dialed down and what are the good fats.
Right.
Should I go into
absolutely.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, I think that's why a lot of people struggle with this, is that we tell them to stop the carbohydrates, cut the sugar, and then we say, and by the way, really ramp up your fat intake. And the dogma of saturated, the diet heart disease, where saturated fat is causing heart disease, clogs your arteries, because, of course, when the bacon grease is sitting there solidified, it must solidify in our arteries as well. That's what we all been taught, right? Yeah. So that is a tough part to share with patients, and we'll go into the lipids and the good fats in a second. And just to echo what you were explaining, even from an energy allocation, I listen to many of I would say my role models in this space. And as I learn more and more, one of the most important things I'm sharing with our patients is fueling our body. And our body is fueled by the two macronutrients, carbohydrates and fat. And really what I learned really most recently is our body prefers carbohydrates as a fuel source because it's easy, and we love them, and we love carbs. And our body says we love them because we have a craving for them. Our body wants to fuel on something that's easy to fuel on. But what's interesting is we can't fuel on carbohydrates and fat simultaneously. We're either fueling on one or the other, which is really quite fascinating. So what we're trying to tell people is that we want to fuel our bodies with fat that we eat, and then, of course, most of us have stored fat that we need to access, if you will. And this is the principle. We're helping people to fuel themselves virtually on fat. And so let's talk about those good fats, because we've all heard our leaders, the American Heart Association, saying don't eat saturated fat. But we're here to provide new guidance. So let's talk about good fats as far as
I cannot agree with you more. I think helping people get over this fat phobia is probably the hardest thing.
Right.
That we have to do is like you have to embed that fat is good for you.
Right.
But not all fat. So according to, what happened for the last 50 years, we removed from our diet saturated fat that was used for years and years: butter, lard, tallow, even tropical fats like coconut oil. And we replaced that largely with refined carbohydrates. Like if we look at packaged foods, everything that was low fat or fat-free had to have something to take place of the fat, and usually was a form of carbohydrate. And the fats now in our diet became vegetable oils, right. Something that's completely new and foreign to our plate. And these are not only highly processed fats, they are very high in omega-6, the inflammatory fats. So to explain a little bit, so we have saturated fats that are present in every kind of food, everywhere, at certain proportions. Then we have the unsaturated fats, the omega-6 and omega-3s, and those are essential fats. We have to get them from the diet. Otherwise, the body cannot produce it, and they are essential for immune system, cardiovascular, brain health, like a gazillion of things. So a good ratio between these two fats is 1-to-1 or maybe 2 or 3 times more of the inflammatory one, the omega-6 to 3. However, what happens in our modern diet with processed food, with vegetable oils, we end up getting as much as 30% more omega-6 pro-inflammatory fats as opposed to omega-3s. And that contributes to the problem that's caused by insulin. So now we have insulin, which is an inflammatory hormone, and then we have fats that also drive inflammation through this cascade of eicosanoids that are produced, like prostaglandins and all that, that mediate inflammation. So it's a double attack on our body. It's like we use food to get sick. So vegetable oils, people will be, what is a vegetable oil? Think soybean oil, canola oil, peanut oil, corn oil. Those are, and even seed oil, like sunflower, pumpkin. In fact, any oil that you have to have some kind of factory with distilleries and complicated methods of extractions that are new, that are of the industrialized era, they're all refined products. So if you look at the olive, for example, if it stays in the tree and it ripes, it starts to drip oil. You press it, you extract oil. It's an easy process that has been used by humans ever since we collect olives, right? So although coconut oil and olive oil are extracts from a whole food, it's a different technology. So I would say when you embrace this way of eating, make an oil change where you start paying attention to everything you buy and comes in a package, and eliminate foods that come with any type of vegetable oil, soybean, canola, corn, all of this. And pay attention to the word hydrogenated and partially hydrogenated. What happens, so vegetable oils as they are not good for us. But then we add hydrogen to vegetable oils to make them solid, so they behave like the saturated fat, which we remove from the diet because that's the type of fat is used in cooking. So we have to have some solid fat that's solid at room temperature. That's a characteristic of a saturated fat. So when we do this in the chemistry, in the laboratory, we add hydrogen, we actually cause a change in the chemical structure of the fat, and it becomes trans fat. The cis orientation in space and trans. This trans fat orientation of fatty acids makes them much more rigid even than the saturated fat, and cause or contribute to the cardiovascular heterogeneity of fats, so to speak. And so this has been finally documented, and now is required to be trans fats to be listed on the food label. However, here's the catch. You will read a food label, and the nutrition facts are per serving, not per entire package. And often a package has more than one serving. If the serving has less than 0.5 grams of these hydrogenated fats that contain trans fats, they are not required to list it. So they would list 0. But then let's say the package has 10 servings of 0.4 and you eat the entire package. So when you add it up, you eat 4 grams of trans fat. So overall, eating processed foods that come with vegetable oils and hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils, it has a cumulative effect, detrimental effect on someone's health.
Right. Well, that's very important because a lot of folks really, they focus, we hear about the trans fats, of course, and the trans fat ban. I didn't know that tip you just mentioned, but and we're really taught to look at the labels, but we're taught to look at mainly the calories contained in foods, not necessarily these macronutrients. And so really important that we delineate which fats are good for us. So the theory that all saturated fat is bad, animal fat, bacon is bad. Do you have a difficult time convincing your patients to pick up a piece of bacon and have unlimited eggs? How is that for you?
Yes, and especially at the beginning.
Okay.
They are reluctant. Like, what? I can eat the whole egg? I mean, I can eat as many eggs I want, and I can add bacon to it. Yes, it's definitely like this, the reaction. Everybody gets a little bit shocked. But I always emphasize, as long as you can keep the carbohydrates low, you are okay. You eat them together, just like you said. You can't use both at the same time as fuel. Body will prefer to go with the carb. And chances are that you are going to take that carb and turn it into fat that actually is the worst kind of fat, this new fat produced from carbohydrates, some substrates. Right. That's what leads to this very small density lipoproteins that penetrate the arterial plaque. That's what raises the amount of fat, the triglycerides in one's blood. Too much carbohydrate. So as long as we dial down those carbs, we can have the good fats, whether that's butter from grass fat preferably, or coconut oil or olive oil, or eating whole nuts and seeds. It's good. And I wanted to mention about the vegetable oils. Many people use them for cooking, but these oils, because they are polyunsaturated fats, they are very sensitive to the action of oxygen, light, and heat. They easily get denatured. So you take in damaged oxidized fat that just add to the oxidant or the free radicals in your body, which contribute to disease processes, whether it's cancer or an autoimmune disease or cardiovascular. It doesn't matter. You add more wood on the fire, basically.
Right. Well, I think one of the things, as we're going to have several more discussions together, and I think we'll hit topics such as how to get started in this fat burning world, disease reversal, what people can expect to see from their conditions as they move in this world. Where does fruit is always a hot topic. Where does fruit play a role? We'll get to that in future episodes. I think one of the things that I'd like to cover, and I don't want us to go too long here, is really for those who are learning how to get started on this low carb lifestyle. I think the easiest thing for them to do is to really focus on that carbohydrate reduction and really elimination. I know that on our no sugar, no starch diet, we limit our patients to 20 grams per day. Mm-hmm. And I'm almost getting to the point where I'm saying, let's shoot for a goal of 0 grams per day in the beginning, noting that there's carbohydrates in most products or a lot of products. How are you having your patients start when we're just really trying to, at the very beginning stages of this educational and lifestyle change, what are you instructing your clients to do?
This is a very good question, and I always answer it depends. It's an individualized approach. That's the power in working one-on-one versus getting a broad view approach. So if the person is a type 2 diabetic that we want to manage blood sugars without drugs, right. Yes, we have to look at grams of carbs. If the person needs to lose, 20 pounds even, but they don't have any of the metabolic syndrome traits, let's say, and the person is totally new to this, so they like the SAD diet, standard American diet. First, I try to do let's eat whole foods. So we start looking at food labels and we eliminate everything that has sugar added, which comes under many, many names, and vegetable oils added. And that makes us eliminate just about every packaged processed food like chips and cookies and all that. And then what we drink, we go to water.
Yeah.
If the person is ready to already work on the carbohydrates, then I say no grains. Anything that's made out of grain, whether it's gluten or non-gluten containing, no starches. And here we have all the starchy vegetables from potatoes to winter squashes, legumes included. And I may allow fruits just as a transition because we don't have any sugar. If the person has the urge to eat something sweet, okay, let's go for a fruit because at least it's not the processed sugar. It absorbs as glucose and fructose, yes, but we have to someone get there. So that would be like the first stage, I would say, and of course milk, because milk is also carbohydrate, and this usually helps with the gut as well, because the same carbs that drive inflammation are also difficult to absorb at the gut level, at that enterocyte I mentioned. So it kind of hits both. The gut comes down, they have less gas or diarrhea or cramping or acid reflux. So it works beautifully in that sense. So I would say that's the first big jump if we can do. I don't stress about protein because usually in the first phase of adopting the low carb, people tend to eat more protein. It's normal and it's okay. It's the adaptation phase. Right. After 3-4 weeks, then we start to look at the protein as well, because it can be insulinogenic and plus other issues around having too many amino acids. Fat, of course, it stays liberal. And I encourage them to log. So we know what we do. And I like Chronometer for that. Okay. Very good tool to log macros and micros. And then, week by week we see, okay, so this is what you eat. This is how much energy you get from each macronutrient, and now how you feel. Right. And what's the result. And I would say 3 weeks is the average, 3 to 4 weeks for a person to start to transition from primarily burning carbohydrate as fuel to burning fat as fuel, where the body upregulates the enzymes and happens easier with less food cravings. Because in the beginning, people will feel the drop in the blood sugar, even though it may not even be low in the hypoglycemia levels, but because it's lower than what their average was to that point, and it's not enough ketone bodies there to supply energy for the brain, so they get to feel a little bit jittery and shaky. And then my recommendation, instead of going for something sweet to fix it, let's fix it with something that has more fat and maybe a little bit of protein. So we still help with some carbohydrates will get to be produced either from the amino acids, or if it's nuts, it has some carbs, right. But it's mostly fat. So eventually you go over the craving and the drop in energy. Right.
Well, you mentioned ketone bodies, and ketone bodies, for those that don't know, ketone bodies are a form of fuel that our body makes when we release our fat stores. And so too often, a lot of folks want to know they're having progress with conversion from a carb-burning state to a fat-burning state. And often I'll tell patients to pick up some ketone strips. It kind of, any sort of incentive or data to show folks that they're doing it and their body is converting. But there are, oftentimes we see patients who are following a very low carbohydrate diet, only eating whole foods, but they use the ketone strips and they don't see ketones in the urine, and they get really worried about that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I would love to, because what happens in the first stage is when the body shifts again from burning carbs to burning fat. Like you mentioned, when we burn fat, the breakdown of fat into energy is not through the glucose pathway, but to this, it's a process called beta oxidation, and the end product is ketone bodies.
Right.
And when we start to produce ketone bodies, the kidney function, filtration shifts. It has to adapt to a new metabolite that has to be filtered. So in the beginning, we'll excrete more of the ketone bodies, the acetoacetate that gets excreted in the urine, and that's what we test with the dipstick.
Right.
But that's all. It fluctuates a lot. It's rather non-reliable, and it mostly happens in the beginning. Once the kidney once this becomes the new norm, the kidneys adapt to that. And another thing that happens, uric acid goes up. So in the first stages of adaptation, uric acid goes up if you measure uric acid, and ketone body gets out in the urine. So the kidneys kind of prefers to eliminate ketone and holds on to uric acid. So if someone has gout, it's important to know, to alert them that you may have more symptoms in your gout. So let's manage that while you pass the phase. So after this adaptation, then the kidney functions, you won't find as much acetoacetate in the urine. It begins to be used more for fuel, although the preferred one really for the brain is beta-hydroxybutyrate. I should say there are three. It's beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone, which is the instant breakdown of acetoacetate into acetone, and it's eliminated through breath. So we often find this fruity breath in people that are in ketosis. And that's because of one of those ketone bodies it gets immediately converted into this gas, acetone, that we pass. And hence, talking about testing, there are meters that you blow in and you measure acetone, and they're pretty accurate. It's a higher first investment, but then long term is less cost. And the results, the reading are very comparable to the gold standard, which is beta-hydroxybutyrate in the blood. Now, beta-hydroxybutyrate, of course, to check it in the blood, you have to be willing to stick your finger, just like you do with glucose. And it's long-term is more expensive. It's cheaper to buy the meter, but the strips are expensive. I personally still do finger sticking. I measure both glucose and ketones occasionally, just for the fun of it, to see where I am at. But with my clients, I still use the beta-hydroxybutyrate, the blood testing, as it's, I don't know, goes as more accurate. But then once they move into maintenance, they can go ahead and buy the meter and use the breath analyzer. So that's the answer to the urine stick. I really don't even recommend doing it. The best is blood or breath, and just pay attention to energy levels, cravings, and hunger. Of course, my tip for people is not even to put them on the scale, but get a clothing item that it's tight on you. It really, you have, to hold your breath to close the zipper or here over the the breast for women, and have that as your measure of unit. And then 1 month into it, put it on you and see how that fits. That's a good indicator that your body composition begins to change.
Right.
Because once you start burning fat, you burn some of the fat that you eat, but you will burn fats that have been stored on your body. And probably we can talk about this next time, to speed up to 10x that. If we combine intermittent fasting with the low carb, then that's when you 10x the results.
What a great tip with the squeezing into a tight outfit that used to fit, and then letting that be your barometer. Because too often, how many times have you heard from patients and clients, I tried that before and it didn't work for me, and I will say, how long did you try it? And the person may say, well, I tried it for a week or two way back when. And it's even our patients now, we have in our office patients like to see data. They like to see progress. It makes us feel good when we see the number is less on the scale, and we have a really neat body composition scale, which is really terrific, and people do like that. So we will utilize that technology. But if we didn't have that technology and we were just looking at the number on a scale, I would have so many patients mad at me and really probably give up on this way of eating altogether, because the net loss sometimes is not very wowing. But when we're able to look at the net fat loss, that is really eye-opening, and to see the muscles are engaged when we're in a fat-burning state. They're think of them almost as getting a constant fuel source. So we see muscle mass increase on a ketogenic diet as well. And there's nothing really greater when you see your fat coming off and your muscle going up. People tend to not necessarily care about, or at least as much, what the total figure is. So,
I totally agree.
Well, this has been really great. I think what I'd like to invite our viewers to comment on is really some specifics on what they would like us to cover. We delved into the science a bit today, and I think in future broadcasts we really focus on more specific issues that our watchers want to know about. We talk about this all day long, and we have this information in our brains. We just want to get it out to all of you out there. So thank you for watching us today.